The cruelest lies are the ones we tell ourselves before we ever speak them aloud. Rain fell steadily against the tall windows of the Russo estate, turning the city lights beyond the glass into blurred streaks of silver and gold. Ethan Walker stood quietly beside the fireplace, his hands resting in the pockets of a light gray coat he had not yet put on. The house felt strangely unfamiliar despite being the place he had called home for nearly 3 years. Every photograph, every carefully chosen piece of furniture, every warm light in the room carried memories he had once believed would last forever. Across the room, Damien Russo remained standing behind his desk, reviewing a document he had not truly been reading for the last several minutes. Silence stretched between them until Ethan finally spoke with gentle honesty. "If there is something you want to say, please say it now." Damien slowly looked up, his expression calm but distant. He had spent weeks convincing himself that pushing Ethan away would protect both of them from the dangerous world surrounding the Russo family. The problem was that the lie had become easier to repeat than the truth hidden beneath it. He inhaled quietly before speaking words that sounded colder than he intended. "I never loved you." The sentence settled into the room with unbearable weight. Ethan did not argue. He did not cry. He simply lowered his eyes for a brief moment, allowing himself one silent breath before looking back at Damien with surprising composure. "Are you absolutely certain?" Damien forced himself to nod even though every instinct inside him urged him to take the words back. "Yes." Ethan studied his face carefully, almost as if searching for the man he had known instead of the stranger standing before him now. After several long seconds, he offered a faint, bittersweet smile that carried more sadness than anger. "Then thank you for finally being honest." He slipped a simple silver ring from his finger and placed it gently on the polished wooden desk between them. The soft sound of metal touching wood echoed through the quiet office. Damien stared at the ring without moving. Countless memories rushed through his mind at once, yet pride refused to let him speak. Ethan turned toward the staircase and walked upstairs with slow, steady steps. He packed only a small suitcase, leaving behind expensive gifts, tailored clothing, and everything that had once represented the life they built together. The only belongings he carried were personal sketches, family photographs, and a notebook filled with interior design ideas for projects he had always hoped to complete someday. When he returned to the front entrance, the rain outside had become heavier. Damien remained exactly where Ethan had left him. Neither man spoke. Ethan rested his hand on the doorknob before quietly saying, "I truly hope you find the peace you believe this decision will bring you." Damien answered with nothing more than a restrained nod. Ethan opened the door and stepped into the rain without looking back. The sound of the closing door echoed through the enormous mansion, leaving behind a silence unlike anything Damien had ever experienced. He told himself the emptiness would disappear by morning. He told himself life would continue exactly as before. He told himself he had made the correct decision. Yet as his eyes fell once more upon the silver ring resting alone on the desk, a feeling he refused to name quietly settled inside his heart while, several miles away, Ethan climbed into a waiting taxi, wiped away a single tear before it could fall, and whispered to himself that from this night forward he would finally learn how to build a life where love would never again require him to beg someone to stay. The next morning arrived with clear skies, but neither of us welcomed the sunlight in the same way. Ethan Walker stepped out of the small neighborhood apartment building carrying nothing more than a portfolio case, a laptop bag, and the determination to rebuild his life one ordinary day at a time. The apartment was modest compared to the Russo estate, yet for the first time in years every decision inside those walls belonged entirely to him. He arranged the furniture himself, brewed his own coffee, opened the windows to let fresh air fill the room, and quietly reminded himself that healing rarely happened all at once. Across the city, Damien Russo followed the same morning routine he had practiced for years. He reviewed financial reports, attended executive meetings, approved business proposals, and listened to updates from trusted advisors. Everything operated with flawless precision, yet an unexpected silence lingered around him wherever he went. The cup of coffee placed on his desk tasted different because no one had adjusted it exactly the way Ethan always had. The breakfast table felt unnecessarily large with only one chair occupied. Even the drive to headquarters seemed longer despite following the same streets every morning. Damien dismissed each thought as temporary distraction, convincing himself that habits simply required time to change. Meanwhile, Ethan accepted his first independent interior design project after weeks of searching. The assignment involved renovating a small family-owned bookstore that had survived for generations but desperately needed new life. The owner greeted him warmly, thanked him for accepting the project, and spoke with genuine excitement about transforming the aging space into a welcoming place for children and families. Ethan smiled sincerely, realizing that no one there knew anything about his past. They saw only a talented designer eager to help. For several hours he focused entirely on sketches, lighting concepts, color palettes, and furniture placement until he noticed he had forgotten to think about the painful conversation that ended everything the night before. That realization alone felt like progress. At Russo Group headquarters, Damien entered the executive conference room for a scheduled strategy meeting. Halfway through the presentation, he instinctively reached for the notebook Ethan usually left beside his seat before every important discussion. His hand stopped in midair when he found only an empty section of polished wood. No notebook. No handwritten reminder wishing him good luck. No quiet smile waiting before the meeting began. He withdrew his hand without allowing anyone else to notice. The meeting continued successfully, but for the first time in years Damien could not remember a single presentation slide after leaving the room. Later that afternoon Marcus Reed entered the office carrying routine business reports. He placed the folders on the desk before quietly observing the untouched silver ring that still rested exactly where Ethan had left it. Marcus hesitated before speaking. "Would you like me to have it placed somewhere safe?" Damien looked at the ring for several silent seconds. "Leave it where it is." Marcus nodded respectfully and changed the subject without asking another question. As evening approached, Ethan completed the first draft of the bookstore renovation and received heartfelt thanks from the owner. Walking home through the quiet streets, he realized the weight inside his chest had become slightly easier to carry. The pain remained, but it no longer controlled every breath. At that same moment, Damien returned to the mansion expecting the familiar greeting that never came. He opened the front door, stepped inside, and found every room perfectly organized, yet the house felt strangely empty despite its size. Without thinking, he quietly spoke a single word into the silence. "Ethan." Only the echo answered him. While several blocks away, Ethan received an unexpected email inviting him to present his newest design proposal to one of Chicago's most respected architecture firms, an opportunity capable of changing his entire future forever. Several weeks passed, and the rhythm of Ethan Walker's new life slowly settled into something peaceful. Every morning began with a short walk to a neighborhood cafe where the owner already knew his favorite drink, followed by long hours designing spaces that brought comfort instead of luxury alone. The invitation from one of Chicago's most respected architecture firms had opened opportunities Ethan once believed would never belong to him. His presentation received enthusiastic praise, and before leaving the meeting he was offered a year-long contract leading several community revitalization projects. The success felt deeply satisfying because it had been earned through his own talent rather than through anyone else's influence. For the first time in years, people recognized Ethan Walker for his creativity instead of introducing him as someone connected to the powerful Russo family. Across the city, Damien Russo discovered that success without someone to share it with carried an unexpected emptiness. Quarterly profits exceeded expectations, investors applauded every decision, and business magazines praised his leadership, yet each achievement ended the same way. He returned to a silent mansion where every carefully arranged room reminded him of the person who had quietly filled those spaces with warmth. One evening Damien entered the library searching for a business file. Instead, he discovered a leather notebook tucked neatly onto a bookshelf behind several design magazines. Curious, he opened it and immediately recognized Ethan's handwriting. Inside were sketches for future renovations of the mansion, complete with handwritten notes explaining why each room deserved more natural light, softer colors, and welcoming spaces where people could genuinely feel at home. None of the plans focused on luxury. Every page centered on creating comfort for Damien after exhausting workdays. Damien slowly turned another page and found a list titled, "Things That Always Make Him Smile." It contained simple observations collected over several years. Fresh coffee before sunrise. Quiet piano music after long meetings. Homemade soup during winter storms. looking at the city lights from the balcony without speaking. Remembering birthdays even when he forgot his own. Damien closed the notebook, unable to continue reading for several moments. Those small details had never seemed important while Ethan still lived beside him. Now they revealed how carefully someone had loved him without asking for recognition. Marcus Reed quietly entered the library carrying several documents requiring Damien's signature. He immediately noticed the notebook resting on the desk. "I have not seen that in a long time," Marcus said gently. Damien looked up. "You knew about this?" Marcus nodded. Ethan worked on those plans late at night after finishing his own projects. He wanted the mansion to feel less like headquarters and more like a home. Damien remained silent. Marcus hesitated before continuing. "He always believed one day you would have enough time to enjoy it." Those words lingered long after Marcus left the room. Meanwhile, Ethan visited the nearly completed bookstore renovation for its final inspection. Children laughed while exploring colorful reading corners, parents thanked him for creating such a welcoming environment, and the elderly owner quietly embraced him with grateful tears. "You gave this place its heart back," she said sincerely. Ethan smiled with quiet humility, never mentioning that rebuilding the bookstore had also helped rebuild his own heart. As he prepared to leave, another visitor entered the shop and introduced himself politely. "My name is Noah Carter. I oversee community development projects for the architecture firm that hired you. I wanted to meet the designer responsible for this beautiful transformation." Ethan accepted the handshake with a warm smile, unaware that across town Damien had just opened the final page of the forgotten notebook and found one unfinished sentence written only days before Ethan left the mansion. "No matter what happens, I only hope he someday realizes he was always loved far more than he ever knew." The unfinished sentence in Ethan Walker's notebook stayed in Damien Rousseau's thoughts long after the library became quiet again. He read the final words repeatedly, hoping they would somehow change each time his eyes returned to the page. They never did. "I only hope he someday realizes he was always loved far more than he ever knew." Damien slowly closed the notebook and leaned back in his chair. For the first time in years, he questioned not only the words he had spoken on that rainy night but every silent moment that had come before it. He remembered Ethan waiting patiently after late meetings with warm meals that had often gone untouched because business always seemed more urgent. He remembered the countless evenings when Ethan quietly sat beside him without asking for attention, simply offering peaceful company after exhausting days. At the time, Damien had accepted those moments without understanding how rare they truly were. Meanwhile, Ethan's new career continued moving forward with unexpected success. Noah Carter quickly became one of the easiest people to work with because he listened carefully, respected every professional opinion, and always gave credit where it belonged. Their newest assignment involved restoring an abandoned neighborhood community center into a welcoming place for local families. They spent long afternoons discussing architecture, lighting, accessibility, and practical designs that would make people feel comfortable instead of impressed. Their conversations remained relaxed, filled with shared ideas and genuine encouragement. Ethan found himself smiling more often than he had in months, not because the past had disappeared but because the future no longer seemed impossible. One Saturday afternoon, the completed bookstore renovation received a community recognition ceremony. Local business owners, architects, reporters, and city representatives gathered to celebrate the project. Noah invited Ethan to stand beside him during the presentation because he believed the designer deserved public recognition. Ethan accepted reluctantly, preferring quiet work over public attention, yet the audience responded warmly when the bookstore owner described how thoughtfully the renovation reflected the needs of families and children. At almost the same time, Damien attended a charitable foundation meeting only 2 blocks away. As his vehicle waited outside the venue, he noticed a crowd gathered across the street near the bookstore. Curious, he glanced through the window and immediately recognized the familiar figure standing beneath colorful decorations. Ethan looked relaxed, confident, and genuinely happy while speaking with community members. Beside him stood Noah Carter, smiling with quiet admiration as they discussed the completed project. Damien felt something unfamiliar settle heavily inside his chest. It was not anger. It was not resentment. It was the painful realization that someone else was witnessing the version of Ethan he had once taken for granted every single day. Marcus Reed noticed where Damien was looking but remained silent until they entered the foundation building. Only then did he quietly ask, "Would you like me to arrange a meeting with him?" Damien slowly shook his head. "No. I have no right to interrupt the life he is building." Yet throughout the entire meeting Damien found himself distracted by the image of Ethan laughing freely beneath the afternoon sunlight, a smile he had not seen during the final difficult months they spent together. Across the street, as the celebration ended, Noah handed Ethan a small envelope. "The city approved our proposal," he said warmly. "They want you to become lead designer for the entire revitalization program." Ethan looked at the letter in disbelief before gratefully accepting the opportunity. As they walked away together discussing future projects, neither of them noticed the black executive vehicle quietly pulling away from the curb while Damien stared at the folded community program resting on the seat beside him. Printed across its front page was a photograph of Ethan smiling brighter than Damien had seen in years, and for the first time he understood that losing someone did not happen on the night they walked away. Sometimes it happened much later, the moment you realized they had finally learned how to be happy without you. The photograph on the community program remained on Damien Russo's desk long after everyone else had gone home. He had intended to throw it away several times, yet every attempt ended with the paper returning to the same place beside the silver ring Ethan Walker had left behind months earlier. Looking at the two objects together forced him to confront a truth he had avoided since that rainy night. Ethan had never asked for wealth, status, or influence. He had only wanted to be seen, appreciated, and loved. Damien lowered his head, realizing he had mistaken quiet devotion for something that would always be there. The realization followed him everywhere. He noticed the empty chair across the breakfast table, the untouched music room Ethan once filled with soft piano melodies during quiet evenings, and the garden that had begun losing color because no one remembered to care for the flowers Ethan had planted every spring. None of those details had seemed important until they disappeared. Across the city, Ethan continued embracing the opportunities opening before him. The revitalization project expanded rapidly, allowing him to redesign libraries, neighborhood cafes, and public gathering spaces that brought people together. Every completed project reminded him that his work could genuinely improve everyday lives. Noah Carter remained both a dependable colleague and a thoughtful friend. He encouraged Ethan to present his ideas confidently, celebrated every success without envy, and quietly supported him whenever difficult memories surfaced. Their partnership developed naturally through mutual respect, and people around them often commented on how easily they worked together. Ethan appreciated the kindness but remained focused on rebuilding his confidence rather than searching for another relationship. One afternoon the architecture firm hosted a reception celebrating several award-winning community projects. Designers, city officials, and business leaders filled the elegant ballroom while completed designs appeared across large presentation screens. Ethan stood beside one of his displays explaining how thoughtful architecture could strengthen neighborhoods when he noticed familiar gray eyes watching from across the room. Damien had attended the event as a major donor supporting urban redevelopment. Neither man expected to see the other there. Time seemed to slow as their eyes met across the crowded ballroom. Ethan remained calm, offering nothing more than a polite nod before returning to his conversation with local officials. Damien instinctively took a step forward but stopped himself. He remembered his own promise that he had no right to interrupt the life Ethan was creating. Before he could decide whether to leave, the Master of Ceremonies invited Noah Carter onto the stage to recognize the design team responsible for the year's most successful revitalization project. Instead of accepting the recognition alone, Noah immediately called Ethan forward to stand beside him. The audience responded with warm applause as Noah publicly praised Ethan's creativity, compassion, and dedication, explaining that every successful project had begun with Ethan's vision. Damien listened quietly while realizing he had rarely spoken those same words during the years Ethan lived beside him. Recognition that should have come from the person closest to Ethan was now coming from someone else. After the ceremony ended, Damien prepared to leave unnoticed. Marcus Reed approached with several documents requiring signatures but paused before speaking. "There is one more report you should see." Damien accepted the folder absent-mindedly until a familiar name immediately caught his attention. Months earlier Ethan had quietly withdrawn a personal investment account without saying a word. Damien had assumed the funds were used to begin a new life. Instead, the financial records revealed something completely unexpected. Nearly every dollar Ethan removed had been anonymously transferred into a charitable foundation that quietly paid medical expenses for families of Russo Group employees, a program Damien himself had believed was funded entirely by corporate donations. Ethan had continued protecting the people around Damien long after deciding to walk away, and he had never taken credit for a single act of kindness. Damien Russo remained seated in his office long after Marcus Reed quietly left the room. The financial report rested open before him, yet he could no longer focus on the numbers. Line after line confirmed the same astonishing truth. Every anonymous donation that had quietly supported families facing unexpected medical expenses had come from Ethan Walker's personal savings. Ethan had never mentioned it, never asked for recognition, and never allowed anyone to know the source of the generosity. Damien slowly closed the folder and looked toward the silver ring that still rested on his desk. For the first time, he fully understood how many acts of love had surrounded him without ever demanding attention. That evening he returned to the mansion earlier than usual and wandered through rooms that suddenly felt less like a home and more like a museum preserving memories he had failed to appreciate. In the kitchen he opened a cabinet and found neatly labeled recipe cards written in Ethan's familiar handwriting. Each card included small notes reminding him which meals were comforting after difficult meetings or which desserts his staff secretly enjoyed during holidays. Damien smiled sadly as he realized Ethan had cared not only for him but for everyone around him. Meanwhile, Ethan's professional life continued moving steadily forward. The city approved another community restoration project, this time transforming an abandoned cultural center into a creative space for local artists and students. Noah Carter congratulated Ethan during a planning meeting and suggested they celebrate the successful proposal with coffee after work. Ethan accepted with an easy smile, appreciating Noah's friendship and encouragement. Sitting beside the cafe window later that afternoon, they spoke about architecture, future projects, and the simple satisfaction that came from building places where people genuinely felt welcome. Noah eventually became quiet before speaking honestly. I have admired your kindness since the first day we met. I do not expect an answer today, but if your heart is ever ready, I would like the chance to know you beyond work. Ethan looked at him with gratitude rather than surprise. Thank you for saying that so sincerely, he replied gently. Right now I am still learning who I am after leaving a chapter of my life behind. I do not want to promise something before I can give it honestly. Noah smiled with complete understanding. Then I will respect your answer exactly as it is. Your friendship is already something I value. Ethan left the conversation feeling relieved because kindness had been met with kindness instead of pressure. Across town, Marcus quietly entered Damien's office carrying a sealed envelope discovered while organizing archived household records. Our legal department found this among documents Ethan asked to be stored several months before he left. Damien carefully opened the envelope and unfolded a handwritten letter. It had never been mailed because it had been intended for someone living in the same house. The first sentence immediately caught his attention. If you are reading this, then I finally found the courage to tell you something I could never say aloud. Damien continued reading with trembling hands. Ethan described noticing how heavily responsibility weighed upon Damien's shoulders and explained that he had often hidden his own loneliness because he believed Damien already carried enough burdens. Near the end of the letter, one sentence seemed to stop time itself. If you ever decide that your heart has room for me, I will still be here, but I will never ask you to choose me against your own will. Damien slowly lowered the letter, overcome by the painful realization that Ethan had offered patience, understanding, and unconditional love until the very last moment. He had answered that devotion with words that forced Ethan to walk away. As he looked once more at the signature at the bottom of the page, Marcus quietly broke the silence with unexpected news. There is something else you should know. Ethan never received this letter back. Someone removed it before it could reach you, and we have finally identified who accessed your private correspondence on the day it disappeared. Damien Russo slowly lowered the handwritten letter onto his desk while Marcus Reed remained quietly waiting nearby. The room felt unusually still as every sentence Ethan Walker had written continued echoing in Damien's mind. None of the words carried blame. None demanded apologies. Every line reflected patience, kindness, and hope, qualities Damien had mistaken for ordinary because they had always been there. He looked toward Marcus with quiet disbelief. Who intercepted the letter? Marcus opened a secure folder before answering carefully. One of the former household administrators admitted to removing several pieces of private correspondence after receiving instructions from an outside consultant who believed emotional attachments could become distractions for the Russo family. The administrator has already resigned and provided a full written statement. Damien closed his eyes briefly. The truth did not erase the terrible words he had spoken on that rainy night, but it revealed how many opportunities had quietly disappeared before either of them realized it. No one is to pursue further action, Damien said calmly. The past cannot be repaired by creating new pain. Marcus nodded respectfully. What would you like to do now? Damien looked once more at Ethan's signature before answering with complete certainty. I owe Ethan the truth, not another excuse. Across the city, Ethan continued preparing designs for the cultural center renovation. Weeks of careful planning had transformed the project into something the entire community eagerly anticipated. Volunteers, artists, teachers, and local families gathered inside the restored building to celebrate its official opening. Noah Carter congratulated Ethan warmly while introducing him to city representatives who praised the project for bringing new life to the neighborhood. Ethan accepted every compliment with quiet humility, always reminding people that successful spaces belong to the communities who filled them rather than the designers who created them. As the afternoon celebration ended, Noah noticed Ethan standing alone for a moment beneath colorful lights decorating the entrance. You seem thoughtful, he said gently. Ethan smiled. Today is a happy day. I am simply realizing how different my life has become. Noah nodded with understanding. Different can sometimes become something beautiful. Ethan appreciated the sincerity behind those words. At that exact moment, a familiar black vehicle quietly stopped across the street. Damien stepped out alone without security, expensive formalities, or the confidence that had once defined every decision he made. He walked slowly toward the entrance, stopping several feet away from Ethan instead of assuming he had the right to stand closer. Noah immediately sensed the importance of the moment and politely excused himself, giving both men the privacy they deserved. Several silent seconds passed before Damien finally spoke. Thank you for allowing me a chance to see you. Ethan remained calm. You are here. Damien nodded. Not as the head of Russo Group. Not as a Mafia alpha. Only as someone who finally understands how deeply he failed the person who cared for him most. Ethan listened quietly without interrupting. Damien continued, his voice steady despite the emotion behind every word. I believed pushing you away would protect you from my world. Instead, I only protected myself from admitting how much I needed you. The words I said that night were never true. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly before looking back at him. Hearing that changes many things, but it cannot erase what happened. Damien accepted the answer immediately. I know. I did not come asking you to forgive me today. I came because you deserved the truth months ago, and I refused to give it. Ethan studied the man standing before him. For the first time since they met, Damien seemed to carry no pride, no distance, and no expectation. Only honesty remained. Before either of them could say another word, Ethan noticed a familiar envelope in Damien's hands. It was the handwritten letter he had believed had disappeared forever, still carefully folded exactly as he had left it months earlier. The familiar envelope remained between Damien Russo and Ethan Walker as the sounds of laughter from the community celebration faded into the distance. Ethan accepted the letter carefully, recognizing every fold in the paper before he even opened it. His fingers paused for a brief moment, almost afraid to revisit words written by a version of himself who had still believed love alone could solve everything. Finally, he unfolded the letter and silently read each line. Nothing had changed. Every sentence remained exactly as he remembered writing it, filled with hope instead of resentment, patience instead of demands. When he finished reading, he carefully folded it again and looked at Damien with calm eyes. So you never received it? Damien slowly shook his head. If I had read those words when you wrote them, I believe everything after that night would have been different. Ethan answered softly. Perhaps. But neither of us can live inside a possibility that never happened. Damien accepted the truth without argument. You are right. They walked together toward a quiet garden beside the cultural center where newly planted trees swayed gently in the evening breeze. For several minutes neither of them spoke. The silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It simply reflected the distance that honest words alone could not immediately erase. Damien finally broke the silence. I spent months believing I was protecting you from my world. What I was really protecting was my fear of admitting how important you had become. Ethan listened without interruption. After you left, I discovered notebooks, letters, financial records, and countless small things you quietly did for me and for everyone around me. I never thanked you because I never truly saw them while you were beside me. Ethan smiled sadly. I never wanted gratitude. I only wanted to matter. Damien lowered his head. You always mattered. I simply realized it too late. Before Ethan could respond, Noah Carter approached from a respectful distance. He had returned after speaking with several city officials and immediately sensed the seriousness of the conversation. Instead of interrupting, he politely greeted Damien before turning toward Ethan. The volunteers are ready whenever you are. There is no rush. Ethan thanked him warmly. Noah gave a reassuring smile and quietly walked back inside, leaving them alone once again. Damien watched Noah disappear through the entrance before speaking honestly. He seems like a good man. Ethan nodded. He is. He respects people without asking them to become someone else. Damien accepted the quiet meaning behind those words. I cannot ask you for another chance today. I have not earned one. Ethan looked thoughtfully toward the evening sky. Trust does not return because someone apologizes. Trust returns when every ordinary day begins proving that the apology was real. Damien met his eyes. Then that is what I will do. Not because I expect anything in return, but because it is finally the right way to treat the person I should have cherished from the beginning. Over the following weeks Damien never appeared unexpectedly and never pressured Ethan for conversations. Instead, he quietly supported community restoration projects through anonymous donations, approved funding requested by Ethan's design team without attaching his name, and ensured local programs continued receiving resources regardless of whether Ethan ever discovered the source. Ethan gradually noticed the improvements but remained unaware of who stood behind them until Marcus Reed visited the cultural center with routine administrative documents. As they reviewed funding approvals together, Marcus accidentally left one authorization form on the table. Ethan's eyes settled on the signature at the bottom of the page. Every anonymous contribution supporting the projects that had changed hundreds of lives had come from Damien himself, and for the first time since leaving the mansion, Ethan realized that the man who once believed love could be spoken away had finally begun expressing it without speaking at all. Several days passed after Ethan Walker discovered the anonymous funding documents carrying Damien Russo's signature. He did not call immediately, nor did he rush toward an emotional reunion. Instead, he quietly watched the changes unfolding around him. Community centers received promised materials without delays. Families who depended on neighborhood programs continued receiving support. Scholarship funds expanded. Local libraries reopened reading rooms that had once faced permanent closure. Every improvement arrived without public announcements, interviews, or personal recognition. Damien never attached his name to any of it. He simply kept every promise through consistent actions. Ethan realized those quiet choices reflected a different man from the one who had once hidden behind cold words. One crisp autumn afternoon Ethan sent a brief message asking if Damien would meet him at the lakeside park where they had once spent peaceful Sunday mornings before life became consumed by endless responsibilities. Damien arrived early, dressed simply, carrying nothing except the familiar silver ring that had remained on his desk since the night Ethan walked away. As Ethan approached, neither hurried toward the other. They simply smiled with quiet understanding. Damien spoke first. Thank you for giving me this chance. Ethan nodded gently. I wanted to see whether the man I had been hearing about truly existed. Damien looked slightly confused. Ethan continued with a small smile. The volunteers speak about someone who keeps helping without asking for credit. The families speak about someone who quietly listens before making decisions. Even Marcus says you leave the office earlier now because you finally understand that work is not the only thing worth protecting. Damien laughed softly for the first time in many months. I spent years believing strength meant carrying everything alone. You taught me that real strength begins when someone chooses kindness even after being hurt. Ethan looked across the calm lake where golden leaves drifted gently onto the water. The past still happened. I cannot pretend those words never hurt. Damien answered without hesitation. I would never ask you to forget them. I only hope my future actions become stronger than my worst mistake. Ethan remained silent for several moments before extending his hand. Damien looked at it with surprise. I am not offering the ending we once imagined, Ethan said honestly. I am offering a completely new beginning built on truth instead of assumptions. Damien carefully accepted Ethan's hand as though holding something precious that could never again be taken for granted. He opened his other hand and revealed the silver ring. This always belonged to you. I kept it because I hoped one day I could return it instead of hiding from what it represented. Ethan smiled warmly but gently closed Damien's fingers around the ring. Keep it a little longer. One day, when we both know trust has fully returned, you can ask me again. This time the answer will not depend on hope alone. It will depend on everything we build together. Damien nodded with grateful eyes. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the lake, they walked side by side without rushing the future. Months later, the restored community center welcomed hundreds of families for its annual celebration. Ethan continued creating places where strangers became neighbors, while Damien quietly supported those dreams with humility rather than pride. Noah Carter remained a trusted friend whose encouragement had helped Ethan rediscover his confidence, proving that genuine kindness never goes to waste. Standing together beneath warm evening lights, Damien finally understood the lesson that changed his life forever. Love is never proven by perfect words spoken at the right moment. Love is proven by choosing the same person every ordinary day, long before there is any risk of losing them, and Ethan smiled because the man walking beside him had finally learned that truth before it was too late for both of them.